And you know what time it is? It's time for KP's Video News. KP's Video News, y'all. KP's Video News, y'all. KP's Video News, y'all.
That's right, it's time for KP's Video News, y'all. And I'm coming with the real deal. I'm coming hot and heavy. And this story here is about how the cops have, white supremacist groups have infiltrated the police departments nationwide. And this goes back a long way. So Frank Mink, who was a top neo-Nazi who inspired Edward Horton's character in American History X, now speaks out against it and says members of his old neo-Nazi crew became cops. In October 2006, the FBI released an intelligence assessment titled White Supremacist Infiltration of Law Enforcement. Though the document call from the FBI and open sources was heavily redacted, it reached a number of disturbing conclusions. The assessment revealed that white supremacists have historically engaged in strategic efforts to infiltrate and recruit from law enforcement communities. That many of these white supremacist infiltrators are known as ghost skins who avoid overt displays of their beliefs to blend in, and that the KKK have long-standing ties to local law enforcement. These firm ties between white supremacists and law enforcement persist to this day. Last year, Reveal published an investigative series exposing the police's proclivity for Facebook hate groups and racist memes, and in late August, former FBI agent Michael German compiled an exhaustive report detailing the prevalence of racism, white supremacy, and far-right militancy in law enforcement, and the federal government's non-existent response to it. Links between white supremacists and law enforcement have been thrown into sharper relief in recent months following the killing of George Floyd and numerous instances of curiously chummy behavior between police and far-right militiamen during the ensuing protests for Black lives. Frank Mink, once one of the most prominent neo-Nazis in the United States and the inspiration for the character Derek Vineyard, played by Edward Norton in the 1998 film American History X, thinks he knows why. I know that there are neo-Nazis who I used to run with who are now cops, he stated, and that's just in my crew. Imagine how many neo-Nazis and white nationalists have been becoming cops. 3 of the people in my crew alone became cops. And Mink, 45 years old, recalls attending a big summit in the early 1990s with David Duke and other white nationalist leaders. They were telling us to cover up our swastikas, grow our hair out, and become cops. He says, I know of at least 3 people at that meeting who became cops. And the main reason Duke and the other white nationalist speakers were urging their hate-filled charges to join law enforcement did not have so much to do with alerting skinhead crews of pending investigation action against them, as the 2006 February FBI assessment concluded, but to disenfranchise people of color, particularly black people. The Fourth Amendment is violated all the time by cops, and in these meetings they would say, yeah, when we become cops, we'll get them felonies so they can't vote. That constantly went around. Mink remembers sighing deeply, we need to get all these white nationalists out of the police force. There are so many racist cops, and I know a lot of cops. In addition to releasing an updated and unredacted version of the FBI's 2006 assessment, which Democratic lawmakers are presently lobbying for, one possible method of weeding out white nationalist cops, Mink suggests, would be to create a team of former neo-Nazis like himself who would investigate cops that have arrested a high number of black people solely for resisting arrest. We have to put together a bunch of formers like me to go through their bios, and their social media to see if we recognize any signs. He says, it's time for us to be a service to the people, and what better way I can be a service to anybody when I know the answers to the problems. I'm a person who can contribute because of my past. People like me have the antibodies of hate in us because we had the virus of eating away at us for so long. Mink grew up in the housing projects in South Philly. He came from a broken home and says his mother neglected him and his stepfather regularly abused him. His stepdad would beat him, and he wanted to get hit by a car just so he could go to the hospital and not have to go home and get whooped by his stepfather. At age 13, he fell in with a group of neo-Nazis. For the first time, he felt accepted and like what he said mattered. And eventually he went on to be arrested and went to prison for assaulting a person that was like somebody like Antifa. He kidnapped him, beat him, and held him for ransom. So here's the next step to that is the House Democrats again postpone a hearing on white supremacy in the police departments. This all ties in. Democrats postponed for the second time a House Oversight Committee hearing Tuesday morning intended to focus on violent white supremacy in local police departments. The hearing titled Confronting Violent White Supremacy in Blue, the Infiltration of Local Police Departments, and hosted by a subcommittee on civil rights and civil liberties and chaired by Maryland Democrat Jamie Raskin, was previously rescheduled 1 week ago. This hearing was again postponed Monday evening. No new date has been set. Debbie Schultz, a Florida Democrat and member of the subcommittee, told the Washington Examiner that Raskin canceled the hearing because of a medical emergency in the family of a witness scheduled to testify. The hearing, likely to be a contentious one, is meant to be part of a series of oversight events related to the ongoing violence in the streets across the country. It had been rescheduled to take place 3 days after the Los Angeles deputy was shot point blank range in the ambush style attack. We've had those hearings go back in a series since sometime last year. It got scheduled once and then moved. And so I was looking forward to talking about the extent to which our law enforcement police officers are under constant siege right now, as evidenced by the 2 LA sheriffs who were shot point blank in their vehicle. But you know, I can only hope the Democrats, instead of continuing to play politics with hearings, are going to maybe try to actually do something for the American people by moving small business bills, something like that. So these people that are on this committee can't get it together. So the witnesses at the hearing were expected to be Vida Johnson, Associate Professor of Law at Georgetown University, Mark Napier, Sheriff of Pima County, Arizona, Peter Simi, Associate Professor of Sociology at Chapman University, Heather Taylor, President of Ethical Society of Police in St. Louis. So these people know. They know exactly what's going on. So they got a leaked memo that just came out a few days ago, and it states that white supremacy is the most lethal threat to the United States. The Department of Homeland Security draft assessment says, and white supremacists will remain the most persistent and lethal threat in the United States through 2021, according to the Department of Homeland Security draft documents. The most recent draft reports predicts an elevated threat environment at least through next year, concluding that some U.S.-based violent extremists have capitalized on increased social and political tensions in 2020. Although foreign terrorist organizations will continue to call for attacks on the United States, the report says they probably will remain constrained in their ability to direct such plots over the next year. The threat assessment, which also warns of continued disinformation efforts by Russia, and especially notable as Trump has often employed race-baiting tactics in his quest for re-election and frequently downplayed the threat from white supremacists, during his term in office. The Trump administration has portrayed Antifa and anarchists at the top of the U.S. threat, with the president tweeting this summer that he would designate Antifa as a terrorist group, but recently released draft reports, which were made public, assessed a host of threats, including cyber, foreign, and irregular migration. All three drafts state that white supremacist extremists are the deadliest threat. However, the placement and language about white supremacy in three versions of the DHS drafts documents differ slightly. The earliest available version of the State of Homeland Threat Assessment 2020 draft reads, "We judge that ideology-motivated lone offenders in small groups will pose the greatest terrorist threat in the homeland through 2021, with white supremacy extremists presenting the most lethal threat." The lead section on terror threats to the homeland is changed in the latter two drafts, which replace white supremacist extremists with domestic violent extremists presenting the most persistent and lethal threat. The reports, however, all contain this language: among domestic violent extremists, we judge that white supremacist extremists will remain the most persistent and lethal threat in the homeland through 2021. And documents wanted there to be a benchmark about what the career folks at DHS actually assessed the threats to be against the final product that has released by the department. The most striking thing is the political atmosphere. They have said what they said: the white supremacist violence is the threat that they are most concerned about. I don't want to criticize them when that language is there. He said that said in somewhat different in the first draft and the subsequent of the two. And I do think that the nature of the change is notable as a reflection of the political pressure they are under. And the 2020 draft also finds that Russia state affiliated actors will continue targeting U.S. the industry and all levels of government with intrusive cyber espionage. According to the draft, China and Russia are the most capable nation-state cyber adversaries, but Iran and North Korea also pose a threat to the United States. So Trump has regularly downplayed the threat of white supremacist violence during his presidency, most notably when he said there were some fine people among the extremists that sparked violence in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017. He also called Black Lives Matter a symbol of hate and has regularly pushed narratives on Twitter that emphasize violence against white Americans as he seeks to curry support in the suburbs. Officials in his administration, however, warned against white supremacist extremism. And the White House officials rebuffed efforts by their DHS colleagues for more than a year to make combating domestic terror threats such as those from non-white supremacists a greater priority, and specifically spelled out the National Counterterrorism Strategy. Then, acting Homeland Security Kevin McAleenan said last year, white supremacist extremism is one of the most potent ideologies driving acts of violence in the United States, when he released the department's counterterrorism strategy outlining ongoing threats from foreign terrorism and focusing on domestic terror threats, particularly white supremacists. In our modern age, there continue to be a menace of racially based violent extremism, particularly white supremacist extremism, and an abhorrent affront to the nation. The struggle and unity of this diverse population, he said in a speech in Brookings Institution about a year ago. The threat assessment was prompted by a 2019 DHS counterterrorism strategy that called for annual reports to inform government officials and the public. And of course, like I just stated, that Donald the DC Dunce, Trump, has basically tried to downplay the white supremacy angle. I mean, the Homeland Security said the white supremacists was the biggest threat, but Trump tried to twist it up and try to make it like, Black Lives Matter and the so-called group Antifa was the biggest threat, when he knew full well that the right-wing white supremacist groups are the most deadliest threat in the United States and now always have been and always will be. These are homegrown terrorists. Yeah, ask yourself, why is he trying to protect these homeland terrorists like this? And from a source, this is a sidebar from a source that I talked to, and I'm letting you people know right now, this is a reliable source, and they have told me that October is going to be one of the worst months in the state in the United States. For a lot of different reasons, but as far as black people go, you really truly need to try to stay off the streets. Try to stay off the streets in October, because what they're going to do in October, they've been giving orders to every major city and every major police department in the country to create mass arrests in October, and basically pretty much for arrest as many minorities as they possibly can. And the outcome is, if they start arresting you, specifically a week or 2 weeks before the end of October, and they hold you in jail until after Election Day. Listen to what I'm telling you. You can believe it, or you can say, "Oh, that can't be true." We shall see. In the meantime, I'm alerting you right now. At least 2 weeks before the end of October, if you can at all do it, stay at home. Stay at home until after the election is over. Then you can go back out and do whatever you was going to do. But I'm giving you a heads up. Do not be out there acting a fool towards the end of October, because you will get swept up in these mass incarcerations, these mass arrests that these this is coming from the top down. This is coming from DC. This is being spread out all over the country. They're going to do mass arrests before the election to try to sway the outcome of the election. So you can take it or you can leave it alone. You can say I'm crazy, you just talking this and that and that. I'm just relaying the message to you that I was given. So if you don't want to pay attention to it, don't pay attention. But hey, I'm going to pay attention to it. I've been isolating anyway, so hey, it is what it is. So here we go, folks. This is a crazy place we live in. I don't put anything past Barr and Trump. I don't put nothing past them. They've been coming up with so many different things to suppress the vote, and for them to try to arrest as many people as they possibly can before Election Day to keep them from voting. Yeah, I believe it.
Right. KP's video news, y'all.
KP Video News.
KP's video news, y'all.
Peace.